talk about fears. Let's talk about love. Yeah, I got fears, but I ain't got no love. Yes, I got fears. Fear of plane crash. Fear of car crash. Oh, fear of sex. Fear of alcohol.
We're at Wednesday's Deep Dive. We're going to finish our discussion and go a little bit deeper into the murder of Martha Moxley on October 30th, 1975. So, on Monday, we looked at solved or unsolved, and certainly it's unsolved, even though there was an arrest. And then there was never an acquittal, but as I explained, there was an overturn of the conviction on appeals. So, the prosecution then decided not to recharge Michael Skakel with the murders, although I believe he had served 11 years. So let's start at the beginning. Let's start at victimology. Who is Martha Moxley? Okay, she was a 15-year-old white female. In my opinion, she was a low-risk assessment of a victim, meaning she was not a high-risk victim, as in she wasn't a drug user, a drug partier, prostitute, come from a neglectful household. Stuff like that would make you an elevated risk assessment. She was the opposite of that. She may have tried some marijuana at the time, but that's not uncommon in 1975. She was a transplant, which means she was actually from California, but she moved to Greenwich in the section of Bellhaven, which is a upper. It would even be, I mean, some could consider it upper middle class. I would consider it a high class area there in Bellhaven. It even had its own security shack, or at least it does now. I'm sure that it did back then as well. Looked like a one-way street when I went and did some visiting of that area. One way in, one way out now. I'm not sure back then. I'm sure it was the same. But by all accounts, Martha was outgoing. Her friends would even go far as saying flirtatious, but with no promiscuity involved. In fact, she was a virgin at the time of her death, which was observed at the autopsy. Very outgoing, friendly. Everybody liked her. She had lived in the area for about a year. She became friendly with the Skakels. So the Skakels are relatives to John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and the family. They were cousins, I believe. Michael Skakel, who was arrested for this murder, was 15 at the time. They were cousins to the Kennedys through marriage. They had money. Obviously, anybody that lived in that neighborhood, I believed, had come from a little bit of money. It was regardless of the social economic play of that area, it was much like any other neighborhood where back in those days, 1975, kids would come together and play, ride bikes, do whatever they do. Nowadays, you don't see that much because everybody's on the internet. But that's what a lot of neighborhood kids did back then, and you got to know everybody in the neighborhood, and that was the case here. Martha ended up hanging out a lot with the Skakels. Mostly Michael, who was her age, 15, Tommy, who was a year older, And they grew into a romantic type of flirtatious relationship with Martha. I believe it first started out with Michael. There was some sort of relationship there, more than friends, kind of, in the beginning. I believe Martha's affection, curiosity turned to Tommy, who was older, and obviously Michael didn't like that. Michael and Tommy had a rivalry of sorts, which has been documented, which gets us into the suspectology of, really comes down to four things to me, four individuals. Michael, Tommy, Ken Littleton, who I talked about was the tutor, and an intruder. Even though this occurred outside, I'm talking about an intruder into Martha's life. Could have been from that neighborhood, could have been from outside of that neighborhood. Those are the suspects that I would want to be looking into in this case. The crime scene. Before we get to the crime scene, let's go to a little bit of a timeline here. So, this happened on the day before Halloween, the night before Halloween, which is often referred to as mischief night. And when I was a kid, we did this as well. And that was, I'm talking late 80s, early 90s, where you go out and throw corn and do all the things. Here they did toilet paper a lot, throw toilet paper in the trees. Stuff you don't see nowadays. But that comes into play a little bit here based on a witness's observation. And I'll get into that. But basically what happens is, Michael, Tommy, his sister Julie, and the rest of the family, I believe there were 6 or 7 kids, were basically left to run amok. Not just on this night, a lot of nights. Their mother had died of cancer, I guess a couple years earlier, which left the father to raise these 7 kids, or 6 kids, I'm sorry, I'm not sure which. But regardless, a lot of kids. And he wasn't at home a lot. So they were known in the neighborhood, and this is good knowledge, and it's great that a neighborhood canvass obviously was done. The Skakel residence was almost catty corner to Martha's residence. And they were known to be rambunctious, wild, drinkers, doing drugs. Michael at 13, according to his psychologist, or a psychologist, was an alcoholic. At age 13, drinking beer and becoming an alcoholic. But he was known at least 15 to be doing cocaine, and drugs were prevalent, as with alcohol. Now, Michael years later had written a screenplay or an autobiography book or whatever it was, but in words, which I read, and part of it had said that on this night, his dad had placed him in the care of Ken Littleton, this tutor. It was his first night there, but I read somewhere else he had been there a week, so I'm not sure exactly what to believe, but it was a small amount of time that Littleton was there. And Michael said he did not particularly like him. He was cold. He was big. He was a football coach. But when they had all went to dinner that night, Michael, at age 15, ordered like a rum and coke, an alcoholic drink. Nobody questioned anything. So he kept ordering them. And he thought, well, this would be pretty cool. This Ken Littleton will end up being my drinking buddy. He won't be so hard on me, this and that. Tommy was there as well. He's drinking. They're all drinking. They go back home. They continue to drink there, do whatever they do. Martha's around. She's not drinking or anything, but, it's neighborhood stuff, just typical neighborhood stuff, kids being around. And at some point in time, Michael and Martha and 2 other people go out to the family car, the Lincoln. They're in the back seat together. Now, this is important. They're listening to a tape cassette. I can envision them listening to Leonard Skinner, 1975, yeah. Maybe Bad Company. Probably Led Zeppelin. But I digress. So regardless of what they're listening to, hopefully it was rock and roll, they're in the back seat together. Michael, I don't want to say he has a fascination with Martha, but he is obviously interested in this good-looking 15-year-old girl who has blossomed over the last year. They have been friendly for a year, and there was some sort of romantic interest there, for sure. Probably more so him towards her than her towards him, because when you read her journal, she will say oftentimes how Michael was being an ass and being obnoxious and, yelling at her for leading her brother on and things like this, which is very important in understanding the dynamics between these three individuals, really. So while they're in this car, who knows what they're talking about, how long they're there, what's going on. Some flirtation probably, but Tommy comes out. And when Tommy comes out and says something to Martha, Martha leaves Michael alone in the backseat of that car. She goes off with Tommy. Michael has been drinking all night. I can understand him being upset with this. Regardless, he says that they all then decide to leave that area and drive that vehicle to... I'm not sure if it was that vehicle. It could have possibly been another vehicle, but regardless, it doesn't matter. That they got into a vehicle and drove to their cousin's house to watch Monty Python. Now, this is where the contradiction comes in. One of the people that was in the neighborhood there hanging out with Martha and the kids said Michael didn't go on that trip. Some of the people in the car, at least one or two, said yes, he was with us. Another one in the car says, I don't think he was. I'm not sure. So that's where the contradiction comes in. And it's very important because if he was in that car, he more than likely did not commit this murder. So his alibi is now in question. Tommy states that originally to investigators, he then talks to Martha by the side door of the house and tells her goodbye, whatever, and he goes into his house and she presumably walks home because she has to be home between like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. Well, Martha never makes it. And you got to understand, their houses are not that far apart. But there's a lot of trees, a lot of wooded area there. It's not like a typical neighborhood where you would it's all open. There's a lot of cover. Martha ends up dead. She doesn't come home. Martha's mom starts making phone calls shortly, like midnight. It's just, hey, something ain't right. And they find Martha the next morning behind her house underneath a pine tree. She's face down. There's a golf club shaft there. Her head had been beaten in. Her hair was so red with blood they couldn't even tell that she was a blonde. Her pants and her underwear had been pulled down to her ankles, or at least below her knees. She's face down. And that's it. So police need to begin their investigation. So they start backtracking. Okay, who did she know? Who did she see? Who was she last with? Well, it's confirmed she was last with Tommy Skakel. He becomes the number one priority. They interview him. He says, hey, I said goodbye to her. I had to go back in because I had to write a paper on Abraham Lincoln for my class at school. So police did the right thing. They go to his class. They said nobody had assigned him any book report on Abraham Lincoln. So he's lying. right there as an investigator. That's where you start. Last person to see her. He's lying already. Why lie? Police then decide to focus a little bit on Ken Littleton. I'm not sure why, other than him being a stranger to that area. He fails a lie detector test. Now, as you guys know, I'm not a big fan of lie detector tests, except for the pre-test and post-test questions. Nothing happens. Tommy's a suspect. When they backtrack the golf club that was used to kill her, they find that it came from the Skakel residence. But, the house is not unlocked, or locked all the time. And it had been alleged that the golf club sometimes, the bag was in the garage, but maybe since Michael and the other kids golfed, it would not be unusual for them to leave a club out in the yard. Which tells you an offender or a stranger came by and grabbed that weapon of opportunity. So the case goes cold. Nothing happens. There's no other evidence. She was not sexually assaulted, so you don't have any DNA. There's no evidence of who did this. So it goes cold. So what happens is many years later, decades later, Michael and Tommy's father, Rushton Skakel, I guess is tired or there's some other motivation for him to hire a private investigative company in order to clear the air. Clear my boys' names. Well, it backfired. Because what the private investigative firm did was they published a report called the Sutton Report. And I've read it. And it basically does the exact opposite. It now not only shines light on Tommy, because when they interview them, things change. It also shines a brighter spotlight on Michael. Now, I had not read this Sutton Report before I did my other video on Martha Moxley, but it confirmed a lot of my initial thoughts that I had spoken about on that video. Michael's re-interviewed, Tommy's re-interviewed. Tommy says, okay, after I got Martha out of the car, we were talking, flirting around, horse playing, whatever, teenage kids do. I met her out back of the house shortly after that. And for 20 minutes, we were in the backyard making out. And doing other things other than having sexual intercourse. Now, first of all, then he says we finish what we're doing there outside in the middle of the yard in 40-degree weather. I go back inside. That's the end of the story. Why, now, all these years later, does he change his story? That's a big indicator. And that's something I can understand if it's something like, well, I met her at the side door, I met her at the back door. If you change that in your story, it's 10, 15, 20 years later. I get it. But to say you were making out with the victim right before she died and, fooling around with her That's different. That's really different. Okay. So, okay. It's funny. Look at that. Talk about Martha, and I get this beam of light coming in here. Right in my window there. That's crazy. So why does he change his story? There's got to be a reason, right? There's only two reasons. Because he knows more or he did more. When they interview Michael all these years later in the Sutton Report, Michael also changes his story. He now says, yes, I was at my cousin's house watching the Monty Python thing, so I have an alibi. But when I came back around midnight, I decided to sneak out of the house. And he's not really sneaking out. There's no parental supervision really there, other than Littleton and the older sister, Jolie. But he decides to sneak out and go look into a window of an older woman that he says he has done before. Peeping Tom. Okay? He then makes his way over to Martha's window. And he says he climbs a tree, and ironically, it's the same tree that Martha's found under. He says he climbs this tree. He tries to get Martha's attention. Wow, look at all those beams of light coming in there. That makes me smile, actually. That's crazy. But Michael now says, while I'm in this tree, I try to get Martha's attention. I'm yelling at her, Martha, Martha. She doesn't answer me. So I masturbate in the tree. And I'm hoping nobody saw me. Are you kidding me? Why change that story? You never said that before. So I want to be able to tell you what I think the reasonings for these changing of stories is. The advent of DNA had become prevalent. Did Michael believe that he left some sort of evidence there if he committed these murders? And now he's giving an excuse as to why his DNA might be found there all these years later. I masturbated up there. Of course you're going to find my DNA. But why did Tommy lie? That's the bigger question, I believe. You would say initially, well, he didn't want to say he was making out with the victim right before she died at 10 o'clock when all the dogs started barking in the neighborhood and, people heard voices and stuff like that. He's the last to see her. He's not going to put himself in jeopardy that way. Maybe. But what if there's something more? Which I believe there might be. Now, is it possible that Tommy and Michael were both involved in this murder? Not physically. I would say not. But does Tommy know that Michael did this? I believe the answer to that is yes. And I also believe Ken Littleton knows the answer to that. Now, shortly before these murders, by, I'm going to say 20 minutes, half an hour maybe, Julie Skakel, who was living at the residence, was coming home, and she observed a figure crouched down, dressed in black, in front of their house, like hiding in a bush. I never heard this before until I read the Sutton report. Could that be an offender? Certainly. But again, remember when I said it was mischief night? And we had to remember that? This simply could have been part of that, a prank. But I believe it was probably something a little bit more suspicious. And what I mean by that is, I believe that it was Michael. And I had mentioned, again, in my previous video that I thought Michael was spying on Martha and Tommy and saw them make out. And it was confirmed, I guess, by this Sutton report. And that drove him into a rage. Now, when we look at the crime scene, remember I said the crime scene is the key. The 3 locations. Dogs started barking around 10 o'clock. At least one of the neighbors started barking. Someone else heard like an argument, loud voices. I would contend that was Michael confronting Martha on her way home. He had been sitting there spying on what she was doing with Tommy. That was his girl in his mind. And then you say, well, why not attack Tommy? Tommy would beat the shit out of him. Basically, he can't control that rage towards him, but he can direct it towards the object of his affection, which is Martha. So however it happens, I don't know how, but he catches up to her into the driveway. Now, my only question is, does he have the golf club at this juncture? And I'm going to say probably yes. But some sort of argument briefly took place between him and Martha in that driveway. And it was brief because I believe Michael was furious. And he had a lot of rage. And he probably called her a whore or something to that effect. And she probably snapped at him, don't you dare call me that, or whatever, whatever it was. And he probably hit her. Probably punched her in the face. Or maybe he hit her with that golf club. I would probably say more of a punch, maybe, than the golf club right away. But it could be either or. But there was some blood there. Not a large amount, but enough to know something happened there. And it looked like she began to run, and he caught up with her with the golf club. Whether she fell down then again and he hit her, or she was hit standing up, I don't know, because there was 15 blows to her head. Not all of them, obviously, are going to occur with her standing up. She falls, there's a large pool of blood there. At some point, probably on the 15th blow, the golf club snaps. That's rage, folks. That's rage. That's anger. Somebody was very angry at Martha. So if we start deducing from there, who would be angry at her? This is how you find out who's responsible, folks. Could be a jealous girlfriend, right? Maybe somebody, Tommy's girlfriend. Well, he didn't have a girlfriend at the time. Certainly not Tommy. Tommy's not angry about anything. Could he possibly? Yes. And I'll give you a scenario where he could be. If he wanted to go further and she said no. That could certainly. But if you look at, and Tommy had a background of being angry, being borderline violent. So yes, you could see that. But Tommy then around after 10:20, we're going to say 10:15 at night, after these murders occurred, probably 15 minutes after these murders occurred, he is in the master bedroom with Ken Littleton watching The French Connection, the TV. And Littleton says, I don't see, if he committed murder, I didn't see any evidence of it. Now, this person more than likely had blood all over him, mostly from the spatter from the golf club hitting the head. Now, my understanding is most head wounds like that will ooze. They won't spray. Certainly not after the heart has stopped beating. But again, I like to stay in my lane. I'm not a medical expert, so that's just my understanding of it. Tommy has a quasi good alibi. Now, he could have committed it within that 15 minutes and changed his clothes and took a shower, but not likely. But what I find interesting is that two of the siblings, Julie and I believe John, when interviewed, stated they recall people, maybe plural, maybe singular, going in and out of that house shortly after 10 o'clock. Now, that's certainly, in my opinion, either Michael and Tommy, maybe Ken Littleton, but to a lesser extent, coming in from that murder. Now, remember when I said that her head was beat in with the golf club? The person's rage was not finished. Okay? They then took the shaft of that broken golf club and stabbed her in the neck with it. Now, there's two reasons you do that. You either do that to ensure death, or you do that because your rage has not been fully expended. I believe it's the latter. Now, I believe the autopsy report would tell you that that wound was inflicted post-mortem. Okay. It still doesn't help you determine which one of those it was, because the rage was not fully expended or it didn't ensure death. Now, in the Sutton report, I believe that it indicated whoever did this returned to the scene of the crime. That is a very good possibility, because Martha was then drugged at some point from where that second assault occurred to where she was found underneath that pine tree. Now, why do that? Okay? The killing is over. You either do that to conceal the body, or because your sexual fantasy has not been fulfilled. Now, which one? Well, that's a good question, and I don't know if I have an answer for that. But what I would say is, I believe it's a combination of both, but it's mostly rage. I still believe that Michael committed this murder, and I said that in a previous video. I looked into Ken Littleton, and again, his post-offense behavior bothers me. But the more I thought about it, and the more I read, there were some indications, I think, that somebody had said that there was a lot of unsolved murders wherever he moved to, that he was a serial killer. I don't buy that. I don't see that. But him drinking, him getting in trouble, him doing drugs, which was a total contradiction to how he was pre-offense. So before these murders, he was not like that. That is a big indicator to me that he could possibly be involved in this or committed the murder. But the more I looked, I fully believe he was not the murderer. But what I do believe is that he definitely had knowledge. He knew who did this. Now, how he knew that, I don't know. But I could certainly see the same thing with Tommy. I don't necessarily believe that Tommy was the murderer. Again, it was Michael. The crime scene, the criminal profile tells me that it's Michael. He checks all the boxes. But Tommy knew. Now, I believe in the Sutton report, they even may indicate that Tommy went with Michael back out to Martha's body and he helped drag the body to conceal it. I don't believe that. I just believe Tommy had knowledge. And how I believe that is he probably saw or heard Michael come back into that house. Could have caught him changing clothes, whatever it was. But he knew that Michael committed this murder. Didn't see it, but he knew it. I believe that that's Tommy's involvement. And I believe that's why Tommy lied. Michael lied. Certainly. Because he felt there was evidence there on Martha's body. Which leads me to believe, now in my original video I had said I believed that Michael pulled down her pants as either two reasons. I'm going to see what I've always wanted, or to degrade her. And I still believe that. Yet, if he was worried about his DNA being found there, and I am sure in his mind it was semen, then it makes you believe that this was quasi a sexual motivated crime. She wasn't raped, but that does not mean that he could not have stood there and masturbated, which is frequent with sexual offender fantasies. Maybe he didn't masturbate on her body. Maybe he masturbated in the area. You know, in the grass, outside, under the cover of darkness in the pine tree. Is that a possibility? Absolutely. Could he have come back to the crime scene and masturbated? Absolutely. That is the only reason I could believe that he would come up with this story that he was in this tree and masturbated. I can't think of any other reasons. And and this is important. He says, I called out her name, Martha, Martha. The reason he does this, in my opinion, is to say, see, I didn't know she was already dead. But if it's the same tree, or in at least the same vicinity, you couldn't have been there because she was already dead. Now, I guess, you know, Robert Kennedy would probably say, hey, we don't know what time Martha died. Which is, I believe, true. Because there is no established time of death. It has to be sometime after 9:30 when she was last seen by Tommy. So realistically, her time of death could be between 9:30 at night and when she was found the next morning or afternoon, right? But, again, if you go back to victimology, you know that Martha was always home on time. And her curfew was between 9:30 and 10 o'clock. She would have made it home by 10 o'clock. That's where she was going. And she didn't make it. And then you couple that with the neighbor's dog barking incessantly around 10 o'clock. That will tell you that the murders more than likely happened around 10 o'clock. So you have, it goes back to Michael and Tommy. Why would they lie? If you're not involved in this in any way, why would you lie and change your story? Now, I'm not even going to get into Michael's confessions throughout the years, except for one. And I had stated this before, and it still sticks with me, is when he confessed to somebody and said, "I drove her skull." And to me, that is a golf term. And him using a golf club, and I won't say, I don't know, being a golfer, but at least partaking in that sport a lot. That is something I believe that Michael would say. Now, the other confessions, listen, I've run into a lot of times where alpha dogs, big men, that are accused of murders or something like that, they like that stigma, actually. They do. Now, I'm not talking maybe the businessman who hired somebody to kill his wife, but I'm talking people that think they're tough, people that were in and out of prison. They want that reputation. So whether they did it or not, maybe they will say when someone asks them, "Hey, what about that Martha Moxley?" "Yeah, I got away with it. I'm a Kennedy." When maybe he had nothing to do with it, but he wants to act big. I've run into that a lot. So I don't put a lot of stock into confessions unless those confessions tell you something about the crime scene that nobody knows. For instance, in this case, there isn't a lot that isn't known. But if Michael would have said, "Yeah, I killed her. I saw her making out with Tommy. Pissed me off. I wanted that. She was my girl. And I couldn't take Tommy. I wanted to, but I took my anger out on Martha. And so I confronted her. I punched her in the face. Told her she was a whore. She started to run. Grabbed the golf club. It was laying right there. Hit her with it. And just couldn't stop." Okay, well, if that's your confession, well, I'm going to stand up and pay a little bit more attention to it. But everything, the totality of everything, to me, points towards Michael. Now, is there enough there to convict? I would say no. There's not. Sometimes there's just not. The physical evidence is your best indicator. The crime scene and the golf club. The contradicting alibi for Michael is troublesome. But look who his alibi is. It's his family. Family's going to protect family, and no family is going to protect each other more than the Kennedys. That's family. It's what you do. But the criminal profile and the crime scene assessment of this is very important. Why it's not an outsider is because it's somebody that's very comfortable in that environment. They're not afraid. Remember, there's some sort of argument that takes place, and the person there is not really afraid of that, meaning the offender. He's comfortable having an argument there, beating this person, and then dragging her body to another location. Now, whether they drag that body to another location in order to, like I said, conceal it, which I originally thought that, and I still think maybe possibly, but there'd be other ways to conceal it. You could if it's Michael, go back and get a shovel and dig. Probably didn't want to go through that effort. His rage was expended. He probably was tired. But a stranger, he would do that. He would drag it there and leave it. But again, pulling the pants down and not sexually assaulting the person. Is that because of the dogs starting to bark and scared them off? Were they in the midst of having a sexual assault? Or was it like I originally stated, is it was a degrading effort? I still believe it's that. And it's, hey, I'm going to at least look at what I wanted to all these years, you know. That's what it tells me. I'm sitting there, and while I'm telling you this, I certainly look at the other aspect of that, and it being someone from the outside. But again, the totality of everything tells me that it's not a stranger. To me, a stranger would not have that type of rage towards Martha. But there obviously is other cases where offenders overkilled somebody and didn't know them. You know, they were strangers. So you certainly can't rule that out. But when you couple everything together, the totality of everything, Michael lying, Michael confessing, Michael changing his story, saying he masturbated in a tree, just happens to be the same tree that Martha was found under, his proclivity to violence. He had once chased his Aunt Ethel around with a knife, trying to stab her, according to Michael's own father, because she caught him stealing liquor. His intoxication level that night, not having any supervision, the other siblings hearing somebody come in and out of that house around the time of that murder, Tommy lying about whether he was with Martha that night or not, I think all goes to Michael being the offender. And see, this is what's very important, how you cannot just rely on strictly a criminal profile. Because if we did that, and we did it objectively, you look at the amount of rage, the number of blows, you can't deduce for sure that was not an outsider. You can't. It could be, but it could also fit Michael. So your crime scene assessment and your criminal profiling alone, you cannot deduce who the offender is. But then you throw in the timelines. You throw in the alibis. You throw in the victimology. All those things. Then you can rule out an offender, an outside offender, in my belief. And it focuses in on somebody that knows Martha, and somebody that was angry with Martha, and somebody who had the means, the motive, and the opportunity. And all three of those things come back to Michael, in my opinion. So as much as I hate to disagree with Bobby Kennedy, I have to in this. Because that's what it tells me. Let me go through my notes here. Usually these deep dives are a little bit longer than this, but I'd already covered a lot in that other video, and I don't want to repeat the same things. But there was, some things that I had just found out. The Sutton report, which I'd always wanted to read, and I believe it backed up a lot of my assessments in the other video that I did. It showed me a lot of different things. I was able to look at Littleton a little bit more, even though I believe he knows as well. And how he knows is the same thing. He either saw something, Michael coming home with blood on him, Tommy said something, whatever it was, I believe that he knows something. And he's just not saying. And that has changed his personality throughout the years. The weight of that, the consciousness knowing that, I believe, has changed him. Julie saw somebody crouched in the bushes just before the murders, dark clothes. I believe that was Michael. He was spying on Martha and Tommy. He's a peeping Tom. He admitted it. He had done it before. So that's not out of character for him. Julie and John heard someone going in and out of the house at the time of the murders. I believe that was Michael. And he may even have went back out after he committed this murder, because in his mind, did I mess up? Maybe I should drag her. So he didn't initially drag her over there. He had just left her there and then went back and drug her to where she was eventually found. And, his intoxication level. Did I really just do this? Did I really just do this? Did I really just do this? Oh my God. I got to go back out and verify it for myself. Sneaks back over there, sees her, drags her over there, then pulls down her pants and stuff. Possibly. Yes. And the very last thing I've written down here is that Michael did it. Tommy knows Michael did it. Ken Littleton knows as well. So, I think that's everything that I want to cover on this deep dive of Martha Moxley. It's a sad case. Michael did do 11 years for this murder. It's not enough. But I don't think there was enough there to convict him anyhow. And that's just the way our justice system's set up, and that's the way it should be set up. You have to show beyond a reasonable doubt. Now again, he was not released based off his innocence. He was released based off of ineffective counsel. Now what that means is the courts, he had to file an appeal. The courts found that, hey, his first lawyer, who I believe his name was Mickey Sherman, didn't effectively defend him. That's why he was released. And then the prosecution decided, hey, we're not going to retry him because we don't think we have enough evidence. And I believe that. There isn't. But again, just because a case is cold doesn't mean it's not solved. There's thousands upon thousands of cases in our system that are cold. But I guarantee you the police in those jurisdictions know who did it. It's just they don't have enough to prove it. That's the hard part about being a detective. Like I had stated in Darlie Routier's video, where sometimes everybody wants to know why. Well, in this case, I think it's pretty evident why. He was mad that Tommy was getting the attention from Martha. He's the one who wanted to make out with her and do those things. But she rebuffed him. She, according to her journal entries, she rebuffed Tommy a lot too. So I sit here and I keep thinking about, it's what I love sitting here talking this out with you guys for, because it makes you think of different things. There was a van that the Skakel boys use with women. They bring their girlfriends over, they would go in there. Why, in 40-degree weather outside in the middle of the lawn, would you end up making out with Martha and doing heavy petting? And he described it as mutual masturbation. Sure, in the heat of passion, anything is possible. But I don't know if Martha would have done that, according to her victimology. Why wouldn't they use the van if that occurred? Why would they be outside in the middle of... Yes, it was dark out. I guess I could buy it. What would be Tommy's excuse to make that up? He hadn't said it originally, but now he's saying it all these years later. He's either saying it because it did happen, or what would be the other reason? I can't think of why he would say that. I guess we could chalk that up to teenage passion, teenage activity. It could have happened right there. She had rebuffed him a number of times, but she still flirted with him. And maybe, that night she decided to go a little bit further. That's nothing unusual. So, again, Tommy knows. There's no doubt. One way or another, he knows. In my opinion. Based on the totality of all the facts, everything that I read from this Sutton report, it's without a doubt, Michael is the one who fits everything the best. So, that's my assessment of this case, Martha Moxley. Michael did it. Tommy knows Michael did it. And Ken Littleton knows as well. Those three. It's a shame. I feel bad for the family of Martha Moxley. And she deserved better. Without a doubt. She deserved better. So, just makes me sad when I think about it. Alright. So, hey, we have a live chat tomorrow. We can talk about all of this. Live chats are always Thursday at 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then Friday, I will do another video to answer your comments and questions that you leave, which you always do, and I'm grateful for. And hopefully you'll make me see something that I sometimes don't see. And I'm always grateful for that as well. So, until tomorrow's live chat, hey, Maine's out.
Oh,